are in no way connected.
From outside this world.
What?
Back the rest of the sentence, right? And that's just a truth.
Government has made contact with intelligent extraterrestrials.
Hello and welcome to UAP Check News, your demonetized and ad-free source of information on unidentified anomalous phenomena. Today, we have the pleasure of welcoming Edoardo Russo. He is the author of a few hundred articles published both in Italian and in international UFO periodicals, plus several chapters in UFO books and the UFO Field Investigation Methodology Manual. He's currently secretary of CISU Centro Italiano Studi Ufologici, the Italian Ufological Study Center, and director of the Italian chapter of the Mutual UFO Network. Hello, Edoardo. It's a real pleasure to have you here.
Pleasure is mine, of course. Thank you.
So, when did studies on UAPs begin in Italy?
Studies about UFOs that were called flying saucers began in Italy from the very beginning. In 1949, we already had some ufologists, some private investigators or students. Just think that the first parliamentary interrogation was presented to the government in 1950 because there was a large flying saucer sightings wave over Italy in the spring of 1950, and so on. So we have been having a ufological history since, let's say, the late 40s, early 50s.
The first wave of investigation about UAPs wasn't caused by the wave in the United States. It was a wave in Italy that started the research on UAPs?
It's more complicated than that because while in 1947 we had a very small wave of sightings, in 1950 all over Western Europe there was a large wave of sightings in the spring. It was in Spain, France, Great Britain, Germany, Italy. And so we were just a part of that European wave of sightings. But that was the first time that somebody wondered, somebody of the powers that be, and so military and scientific and political individuals put more serious attention to the subject.
And what was the political opinion about UFOs at the time? Were they considered foreign prototypes in the Italian skies, or they directly went extraterrestrial hypothesis?
No, at the very beginning, the main preoccupation was about the Cold War. So anything that was seen in the skies was seen as a preoccupation for potential enemy aerial devices. The fear was that it was something from the Soviets, or more frequently, it was thought to be something from the Americans that were using Italy as a platform. But extraterrestrials only came into the public image a bit later, let's say 1952 and 1954. The great French wave of sightings in September, October of 1954 moved to Italy between October and November, and we had a very, very large number of sightings. There were sightings by military, and there was a first organized collection of reports by the military since 1954.
Studies have shown that cases of UAP may have existed before 1947. Was it ever considered at the time by the first wave of Italian ufologists or was it much later when there were historical studies that noted that before, in the 30s, 20s, 10s, there was these sightings that could be similar to what we call UFOs today?
As you may imagine, Italy is placed exactly where the oldest existing Western civilization has been for more than 2,000 years. So we have a large literature. We have been collecting this literature from Latin, ancient Rome times for a very long time. Let's say that the Italian ufologists began considering what we call the pre-UFO, that is something that was UFO before, ante litteram, before the name was coined, since very ancient times, or let's say in the second half of the 50s. So as long as our international colleagues were thinking that, I can remember Desmond Leslie in his 1954 book, well, at the same time, Italian ufologists were collecting, systematically reporting and publishing all the observations of sky phenomena and linking them to the modern UFO phenomena. Just think that in order to separate flying saucers, a bad name even in Italian, from serious matters, an important group of ufologists changed the name, did no longer use flying saucers, but called themselves clipeologists. That is, they claimed that the ufology was to be renamed following an ancient name used by an ancient Latin author that called flying shields seen in the sky, and it was clipei ardentes, and donc from clipei, clipeology. And that was something that is past, but it is a part of our past.
Oh, very interesting. I think we will do a later show specifically on ancient UFO reporting we can find in historical archives. Has a particular event generated this interest of UAPs, or it was the mass effect of the wave of reporting between 1947 and 1950?
It has been more a journalistic stimulated interest. That is, it came into the pop culture gradually. Jokingly, we have all been saying that flying saucers came to Italy together with the Marshall Plan, as well as rock and roll, chewing gum, and all the American culture. So we were indebted to a lot of information coming from the USA, but developed a ufology of our own with its own peculiarities, of course, just as every other nation did.
I think you said that there were parliamentary investigation. Has the Italian government taken a position on the subject at the time?
There were not investigations, but interrogation. That is a single parliamentary man that asked for explanations from the military, and usually the answers were, there is nothing to be worried about. And this has been like this since 1950 up to 2018, the last time. And it's always been a reassuring answer to any question. As for the government, we know that since the early 1960s, following a very famous, not famous at the time, but a very worrying episode of a close encounter involving the highest political man in Italy, his driver, his car driver, there was not properly secret, or let's say confidential UFO committee created by the Italian Air Force that was in liaison with the American Project Blue Book, and they were collecting reports, and the intelligence services within the Air Force have been collecting sightings by military personnel since, at least since the late 50s.
We talk about politicians and the military. Did you have any whistleblower coming out from the intelligence agencies of the Italian apparatus that ever spoke about it publicly?
Not like the whistleblowers that we have been accustomed to from the USA. Military people having had to work on UFO matters or sightings, yes, they after retiring some step forward, or we have been having relations with some working intelligence people. We have been having I cannot say collaboration, but exchanges of information between private ufologists and military ufologists since at least the early 1970s. The more paranoid fringe might say that we have been infiltrated by secret agents. Maybe. I think that any intelligence has to collect information from wherever. And so it's nice that it is like that. But there was no clamorous revelations about secrets, anything like that.
Did scientists ever conducted studies about UAPs in Italy?
Sorry? What?
Did scientists ever...
It's a more controversial issue because there has always been some scientists privately interested in UFOs, and there are several scientists or university teachers that are following the subject or are even members of the civilian UFO organizations. But there has never been any organized study by any university or scientific body in our country, as far as we know. There was an attempt after another large wave of sightings that deluged our country in 1978. And there was a request to the National Research Council if they might begin a study about UFOs. But the National Research Council said, no, thank you. They didn't want to get involved in such a controversial and now we say stigmatized subject.
What would it take to have a large-scale scientific research program on UAPs in Italy, in your opinion?
In my opinion, money. If there was anybody putting a good quantity of money on it, some university, some research body would jump on the bandwagon, even if for just getting the money. Because we, in our country, scientific research is always suffering from poor finances, and so any good, well-financed effort might persuade somebody to say, "Hey, we are here, we are ready." But it's very improbable.
What type of numbers are we talking about? Millions, tens of millions?
What numbers are we talking of?
Of money.
Money.
How much money would it take to launch a proper large-scale research in Italy?
We are talking about probably something more near the million euros than a few hundreds, thousands. That would not be enough for a serious study. But if you find somebody wishing to pay for that, we had a congress a few years ago that has exactly that theme. What could we do with 1 million euros? What kind of projects or specific research we might suggest or commissionate to professional scientists? And well, yes, let's say that 1 million would be good, a very good sum.
Very well. If you can provide me the link to these recommendations so I can put it in the description of the video for the audience. I think that would be very interesting to have the results of that conference, to be honest. Okay. What reference books would you recommend on the Italian cases?
About reports, about physical reports, the best is a collection of volumes that is called precisely UFOs in Italy. It has been published in 6 volumes, beginning in the mid-1970s up to let's say, the 20,000 years. It was initiated by a local UFO group in Florence that was called, is called, because it's still existing, the Sezione Ufologica Fiorentina. In acronym it is SUF. And it is the best available collection of UFO reports from our country that was published in book forms.
Are there authors or veteran researchers you could refer the audience to if they are looking for reliable source regarding Italian cases?
Reliable sources, the best I can think is the very wide collection of about 35,000 UFO reports that has been collected by the Italian Center for UFO Studies. That as a main aim, the main goal of its activity, the systematic collection of any bit of information about all UFO sighting reports ever happened in our country. So we are very systematically and meticulously collecting, I cannot even say how many sources. I think that we are more in several hundred thousands. Probably we are again in the order of millions of sources, going from local newspapers up to field investigation reports about any event that we may have come aware of.
Most pseudo-skeptics dismiss UAPs as lights in the sky because it can be generated by a wide variety of sources. But once the object comes in close proximity to the witness, there is little doubt about the reality of the observation. Have there ever been cases of close encounters in Italy?
Well, of course, we are not different from many other countries. So what we call the close encounters, let's say testimonies where the witness and the observed object or light are closer than 500 feet, so it's 150 meters. There have been numerous. Let's say that it presently is between 10 and 15% of the collected sample. So we are talking about a few thousands in our country.
That's much more than in France.
No, it's the same order of greatness. If you have, I won't teach anybody about France, but when Michel Figuet collected all landing cases in France, he had a Monmouth book published in 1979, and there were several hundreds UFO landings in France, and more have been happening and have been collected even after he published his book. So the problem is that there must be somebody doing the homework.
That's what I learned a very different percentage in another book, and I was wondering if it was a difference of culture to the approach of close encounters. So maybe the Italians were more open to talk about close encounters because
No, that's only due to extraterrestrials that are appreciating a touristic country like Italy, so they come closer and land here instead of going in colder or worse. It's a joke, of course, but just think of this: all of us ufologists have been collecting reports, and even if national samples are different in quantity. The number of reports divided the population of each country is not consistent in all, for example, European countries. It depends on the activism of the local ufologists or the way to collect reports. But when you have the opinion polls in all these countries, you can see that the percentage of people answering yes to the question, did you see something strange in the sky, is more or less the same. It's more or less 6 to 7%. That is a very huge number, because it means, for example, for Italy, 3.5 million people. So even if I say that we have been collecting 35,000 reports, it's only a very small number in respect to the total number of potential or real witnesses that have seen something but are not reporting it. The largest part of the lights in the sky that are not so interesting indeed under a phenomenological viewpoint are not reported anyway. It's not been so rare to find people, I saw something, yes, once upon a time I was watching, etc. And as for the close encounters, we don't know what is the real percentage of close encounters on the total number. Probably it would be a smaller percentage on a larger total, but it doesn't matter. We are rather sure that in the last 30, maybe 20 years, the number of eye strangeness cases, so the real close encounters, have been diminishing. We have less reports now than how many we had in the 70s or 80s. And we don't understand if it is a different dynamic of reporting or something intrinsic in the phenomenon itself.
Could you give an example of such a close encounter?
Yes, of course. I mentioned one that was not known at the time, even if it was for the first time published in a book by Jacques Vallée. Jacques Vallée is an American scientist that has been considered as the father of the scientific-oriented ufology in the mid-60s. And he wrote in a very evasive way in his book, The Invisible College, about this close encounter that involved the president of an European state republic, but nobody knew if it was France, Germany, Italy. Only later did we discover and got a direct confirmation that it was Italy. Well, the personal driver of the Italian president of the Republic in 1962 was coming back to Rome from the summer holiday villa of the president, where he had brought some guests. And while he was driving across this forest, he found a typical flying saucer. I can really say flying saucer because the shape he drew by himself was a dome, an inverted dome upon a disc that was hovering above trees. He stopped the car, the object came toward him, passed a few meters above his car. He felt the car shaking as the object passed upon him. Then the object was behind his car. He looked back and saw the disc coming back, passing again above the car. Once again, he felt the car shaking. Then the object stopped above the trees, changed the position. So what was an horizontal disc put itself vertically and sped away instantaneously. I may have you look at the drawing he drew and the questionnaire form that the Italian Air Force had copied from the American Project Blue Book at the time. He filled the form, and the intelligence man went and interviewed him and sent the full report that we had never seen in Italy, and sent it to the Project Blue Book, where we recovered from the declassified American files, asking for an explanation that might have been offered by the Americans, because they could not find any, of course. Let me try to show you the...
That's interesting, because you mean that at the time, in the 60s, Italy was volunteering information to the United States regarding UAPs?
Yes, because Italy was and is part of the NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and the Americans had asked all the countries part of the NATO to report about UFOs. And in American files, you can find quite a few reports from military personnel of different countries. And the intelligence people, the American intelligence people, were communicating Project Blue Book about even about newspaper news about it. As for Italy, so to say, one important witness in the 1954 wave in Rome was the American ambassador, that was a woman, Clara Boff Luce. She was a witness herself of one of these mass sightings above the capital. Now you can see the questionnaire form and the giant flying saucer and the car as drawn by the man. So you have the typical flying saucer of the time with the dome, with the portholes, metallic aspect, and so.
You need to share your screen if you want us to look at it.
Okay, because I can see it, but I don't know if you can.
So in the StreamYard, you have a button present.
Now it's upon me. Okay.
It's on the bottom of the...
Yes.
And then you select what you want to show.
Let's see if it... Can you see the flying saucer and the car now?
Yep.
No. So it's me that I'm not...
We see it. We see it.
You can, okay. And if you could read it, you would see that it is the same questionnaire form the Project Blue Book was using in the USA, but translated in Italian.
Do we have a paper trail of that recommendation by the United States to NATO-aligned countries to provide information about UFOs?
I cannot remember having read the letters, but there are the reports sent back from the intelligence people. I can remember, for example, a military case in 1958 that was in Blue Book files, and we got the exchange of letters, for example, about this specific case where the military attaché of the Italian embassy in Washington took contact with Project Blue Book, and what the Blue Book people asked the Italian military to send in for a better evaluation of the phenomenon. Mm. But there is nothing new in what I said. It's all published. This aspect of the interest by the military, the American military for foreign reports have been widely reported in the UFO literature, even in American literature.
Hmm. Was there any physical effects on close encounter witnesses?
The man had no physiological effect, but there were strange dots upon the car. Unfortunately, he washed the car on the following day, so when the military intelligence people came to interview him, and just think that they brought him with the car in the same place, were in the same car as him, and asked him to make the same route and use the chronometer in order to establish the exact sequence. They did a very good investigation for the time. I don't think that the Italian ufologists at the time would have been able to do a better investigation. But no, he had no follow-up on his health or anything like that. The only physical effect was on the car.
How did they know how to investigate a UFO case?
We don't know. We don't know. We have been interviewing the military officer that did that investigation because he had an interest in the subject. He had got to be interested in the subject. and he was the Italian correspondent of J. Allen Hynek and Jacques Vallée in what was called the Invisible College, and has been his correspondent for many years. Then he stopped his interest. We interviewed him. He did not tell us how he had learned, because there was no methodology manual at the time. I think that he used the normal intelligence techniques of investigating, so reenacting the experience, going on the place, and so on. The first time I remember that something similar was published in ufology is in Raymond Fowler's first edition of the MUFON Field Investigator Manual, that is 1973. So the Italian military, I say it with regret, were a step further than us private ufologists at the time.
And in all close encounters regarding Italian cases, were there physiological effects on the bodies, injuries, burns mark? They are in the literature.
No. We have three. Traditionally, Hynek divided the close encounter experiences in three classes. The close encounters of the first kind had no interaction with the environment. The close encounters of the second kind had an interaction. We now use two different classes for this, since Jenny Randles separated two categories. There are temporary effects that are only seen or felt by the witness, but cannot be checked by follow-up investigation, and the durable, permanent effects or traces that can be verified by a third subject. So, close encounters of the third kind were humanoid reports. It's quite another matter. So when you ask me how many Italian reports have been collected with physical effects, that it be on the ground traces, on the vegetables, on animals, on people, on electrical devices or things, the number is a few hundreds. There is a specific collection, a catalog, and there is one person that is doing the work about it, because it is his professional experience. He is interested in physical effects.
And there was, I think, a former NASA engineer called Paul Hill that studied physical traces of UAP to try to extrapolate what could be the power source, the engines, the means of moving of these crafts, alleged crafts. Was there an Italian engineer that was interested in that subject? Because when I do my research, I think there is a weird link between the first works of Marconi, for example, and some works we can see in engineers today in the US that are working on the same path, but almost a century later.
Well, the first to try to analyze this kind of effects was an American, James McCampbell, that wrote a book in the mid-70s. And we have had some articles published about these effects and its evaluation, but there was no real scientific analysis about the Italian reports. We have been asked to provide our data to researchers abroad. Even recently, we were asked for our collection of physical effects, because the physicists always try to, as you were saying, calculate the powers involved, the distance. So, for example, the vehicle interference effect that has been studied by an English researcher, Geoffrey Fowler, in the late 70s, and Mark Rodegier in the early 80s in the United States, brought some articles published about the involved powers. But the only similar study I can remember by an Italian scientist that was a member of our association was concerning a different phenomenon, that is ball lightning. And he had a book published based upon eyewitness testimonies trying to determine exactly the power involved of the electromagnetic source for, I repeat it, it's a different but sometimes similar phenomenon. So maybe the same way of reasoning might be applied to UFOs, but we are not scientific researchers. We are report collectors. We are doing the hard work, the grassroots work. Then there must be someone else that use our data. And we are here doing the same work that in the naturalists in the 16th or 17th century were by collecting fireflies and putting them onto albums without having any clue about morphology or other more systematic studies that other people was able to do basing upon this data. We are the data collectors that are trying to keep the attention live to show that this is not just lunatic fringe people claiming to talk with Venusians, but a phenomenon that has been with us for a short or long time. We may discuss about it, that needs a serious study and somebody trying to give explanations to the people involved. Well, we are in this sort of pre-scientific work, but we are conscious of our limits.
So one way of increasing the reliability of witness reports is to have several witnesses at the same time for the same observation. Do you have a case where you had numerous witnesses at the same time? You could give an example too?
Yes, it's I should say that it's not a guarantee that the case is strange, but since we have to rely on casual witnesses, if we can get more, we can better evaluate this tool that we have, the witness, to try to determine some variables, the shape, the distance, the speed, the direction, and so on, by calculating averages. And yes, we have always been having very spectacular sightings with just one witness, like the one I was talking about, the presidential driver. At the same time, we sometimes have very large numbers of people involved. I can think of some mass sightings with thousands of people looking at the same phenomenon. But nearly always, when you have a lot of people reporting something at the same time from a very large area, you can arrive to an explanation. It's not a real UFO. It's something real, but not unexplained. It's bolides, so meteorical re-entries, or whether large stratospheric balloons, or recently we had the missile launch from the Atlantic coast of France, seen up to Italy. It's always been the case. But we have some sort of middle category when we have more than just one witness. We have more witnesses for a phenomenon, not so many, not mass sightings, but several witnesses, so that we can interview them separately, try to have better measurements and descriptions, and try to get a less subjective report of what happened, because we are nearly always coping with people that unexpectedly saw something they had never seen before and were not prepared to watch with attention. It's more strange than just a car accident witness. And even in car accident witnesses, there are problems in fully understand the dynamic of facts. So just think about UFOs or something similar. So where we can get more witnesses, that's better for us. I can try again to share, but cannot be sure if I'm not sure. Okay, I don't know where I am in your. because we were.
You need to share it first with
I have
present menu.
to, okay, get out of here and return to presentation. Share the screen and then once again find the witness. Okay. Slowly arriving to some, but I don't know. See, what can you see? If I can ask.
I see Microsoft Office, Word, I think,
Yes,
with a blank page.
and nothing else. But I cannot see the sharing that I was hoping to get. Let's try again. Share the screen. Share the screen. Well, do you see my screen or not? Because
No, you haven't shared it.
Not yet. Oh, let's try again. Should be better.
Yep.
Okay. This is an interesting report that I've been investigating myself. It's a few years ago, in 2018, in June, a whole valley, several hundreds people felt a loud noise. Most felt that it was an earthquake because there was a trembling of the ground. The windows glasses were trembling too, and a lot of people got out of their houses. Most saw nothing, but several dozens people were able to see the arrival and passage of one or two planes that were described as fighter planes, very low in the valley, and it's not something that is happening regularly. It's very difficult to move in a narrow valley in late evening. And among the people that saw the light, there were, let's say, about 20 from different parts of the valley that had seen something before the arrival of the planes. There was the noise, they got out, they saw a white light moving not so fast along the valley, going from down to the upper part of the valley, stopping above the mountain, where you can see in the upper right part of the screen, this is the arm and the hand of one of the witnesses that is pointing at the place where the light was stopping. The light remained there motionless for some minutes. Then the planes arrived and the light went away very, very quickly, passing over the mountains, and the planes went seemingly following the light. This was witnesses by people that were on different parts of the valley. So we were able to collect some angular data in order to understand if the light was where it was told to be. That is, was it really so near? Was it really above that mountain? And I can say yes. And as for the planes, that was the strangest part, because the newspapers gave a front page treatment for a few days. They asked the military. The first answer was there was nothing like that, no planes. A second answer, a few days later, was that there was one plane that had been having some difficulties. Some rumors say that it was an experimental drone that had escaped from the military, and the planes were following it to chase it. Something totally stupid. What could the fighters do when they had reached the drone, and then we arrived to an investigation opened by a judge because there was a plane by some people that they had been frightened. The mayor of the town asked for explanations and was not given, and the local parliamentary asked a question to the Ministry of Defense that came in the parliament saying that there had been a malfunctioning of some planes that by mere chance had passed in that valley, but no mention was given to the fact that they were apparently, seemingly following a strange light. And so this is a very curious event because it involved a lot of people that saw this phenomena and the planes. There was what looked like a chase, planes following a light, a strange light, so following a UFO in a broader sense. And we had a strange succession, a very complicated sequence of different explanations or answers by the military that gave no answer, if you have to say correctly, because they say different things in different moments to different questionnaires.
How do you interpret that volatility from the Italian military regarding UAPs?
It depends in part by the fact that you ask different offices and you get different answers. The main preoccupation seemed to explain that they had done nothing wrong. The panic was not caused by them, or it was a casual phenomenon. They looked as more worrying about the panic they caused than anything else. And as long as you follow the command chain, the local airport, the press officer in Rome, then the undersecretary of defense that in the end gave the final answer, each one told different things because they had collected different information. I cannot say it is a proper conspiracy, but it was clear that they had something to hide. We don't know if it was the reason why they were there, if it was the what is interesting for us, the phenomenon, or something else. We could not go beyond this very improper and rough answers, unfortunately. We have not the tools, the instruments to go more deeply than a parliamentary interrogation could, or the tribunal. Once that there was no crime involved, the tribunal was no longer interested. Once that the parliamentary had shown its voters that they had been interested and asked the question, nobody but us was interested in understanding what had happened.
Has the Italian army ever acknowledged the presence of UAPs in its airspace?
Well, let's say that something similar to a public relations office was created in 1979 that has been publishing, let's say, yes, that's it. If you go on the website of the Italian Air Force, you can see their annual reports. They publish a listing of the reports they collect, and they do a little bit of statistics, regional, annual, very elementary statistics. But if you have a look, for example, at this very simple table of numbers, you see that they are saying that they are getting very few reports. We are moving around the units or sometimes the dozens of reports for each year. Just think that the private ufologists are collecting several hundreds reports each year. So you are left with several interpretations. They are only telling the reports they get from the public that goes to the gendarmerie and fill a form. Are military reports not included, or vice versa? Are these only the military personnel reports? Well, the only sure thing is that they have always been getting very few reports. The opposite, as for example, the British Ministry of Defense had been collecting at the time when they published statistics. They were collecting more reports than the private ufologists. But once again, what is called the Reparto Generale Sicurezza, that is the head of the intelligence in the Air Force, are not so interested in UFOs. They are no longer interested in this subject. There was a time when they were collecting more reports, and when we had obtained a nearly complete declassification and copy of all collected reports by this office. It was between 1993, let's say 1996, and 2001. But after the New York attack in 2001, they stopped this kind of declassification. The reorganization of the intelligence in Italy took to the fact that we are only left with what I called a public relations office that is satisfied at publishing once per year a sort of table of the sightings that you can go and have a look by yourself onto their website, and that's all. Nothing more than this.
In the Unidentified series, Lou Elizondo meets with representatives from the Italian army, and they declare that, yes, there are these objects, and sometimes they act aggressively towards Italian armed forces. Do you consider these anonymous testimonies credible?
It would be a long story, and we might talk about it for more than an hour, because if we have to rely on official documentation and claims, there is nothing like that. As for the so-called aggressive attitude, and if you refer to that documentary, you may remember that there was a story about a flying saucer coming out of the sea and hitting a military helicopter with ray and causing it to crash onto the ground. Well, if told like that, it is a hoax. The episode happened not in those terms. This is a very strange reconstruction that somebody put together and offered and told and repeated, but it's completely different from the facts. And so if you ask me what I think about the specific claim that Italian military officially said that they've got reports of aggressive behavior by UFOs against Italian military, I would say it is not true at all.
Have you managed to talk to the pilots themselves who have tried to intercept UAPs?
Yes, of course. As I told, we have been systematically collecting reports, even by pilots. When we say pilots, we have to distinguish at least three categories of pilots. There are the military ones, there are the civilian pilots, airlines, and there are the private ones. We have been investigating and collecting testimonies by witnesses in all three categories. Also because, just to tell a long story short, there was one of our members that had a very interesting position because he was a medical doctor and an Air Force officer, beyond the fact that he was an active ufologist and has been an active ufologist for several decades. Well, he was in a position that when he knew that a pilot that we knew had been a witness of a UFO sighting was going to the annual visit that pilots asked to submit to, he was there. He could have the tours organized so to be there. And when the pilot arrived, he casually told him or asked him, "How, once you saw a UFO?" And as you can imagine, most of these pilots were worrying that the medical doctor was interested in a critical way, and that was possibly affecting their mental health or something like that. And when they discovered that this medical doctor was interested in the UFO experience, they were very relaxed and they talked a lot. We have been collecting several dozens testimonies, first-hand testimonies by pilots, but we have been investigating even within airports. It's been frequent. We have been collecting a few hundred reports of sightings by pilots. Some are explainable, some are not explainable. You can choose the case. For example, one of the reports that was declassified with the full analysis report of the Air Force intelligence was a report in 1994 of two pilots in the same plane, because there was an instructor and let's say a pupil that was learning in a military plane. They were flying in near Latina. Latina is a town near Rome in full afternoon. And the pilot saw that there was a strange object not so far away. He had a better look and saw what he thought was a toy balloon, a small balloon. But while he was approaching the object began to move and kept the distance. The pilot tried at least not one, not two, but 10 times to circle the object. So he went faster, he went slower, he changed the position, and each time the UFO kept the same distance and angle up to a point when suddenly the pilot was able to put his plane in the trail of the moving object. It was a small object, about 2 meters. He was seeing it from no more than 50 meters of distance. It was like two dishes, a green one and a gray one, metallic ones. And while the plane was following it, suddenly the object changed direction 180 degrees, came toward the plane, passed quickly above the plane, over it, and went the other direction. But it came back and passed once again in front of the plane and went away. At this point, the pilot decided not to go on with this strange exercise. But we have the full reports by both pilots, the teacher and the pupil, that were in the same plane, and they described the same thing. And the analysts by the Italian Air Force wrote clearly, we cannot find any explanation for this phenomenon.
And was there a response by the politicians, the military intelligence service about it, or it was just forgotten upon?
It remained in the files, in the archives, up until they declassified it and gave it to us. So I don't even think that politics ever learned about it until it was published in a book. At a given time, there were two journalists that were allowed to have a look at the Italian Air Force files. They were not given the files differently than us. We had got several thousand pages, original page, declassified with a very long process of declassification. You may imagine if the report arrived by the Carabinieri, the Italian Gendarmerie, the Air Force had to ask the General Command of the Carabinieri if they could declassify it. The General Command asked the local company, and so on. So it was a long process, but this notwithstanding, we got several thousand pages of full documentation. The two journalists were only allowed to go there in the office of the Air Force in Rome and see the documents and take notes, no photos. They built a nice book about it. That's another book I might suggest for interested people in military affairs, because there are several hundreds reports that they duly copied and resumed. But up to that time, 2014, no report had been published by the military and nobody knew about this case, but it is just but one. I've been interviewing myself witnesses or met military pilots that privately told you once I met one, I made the report and so on. So it's not so rare a kind of cases. We have always said it's not just the Americans that have been collecting military reports on having military sightings. What we don't know is how many are currently being seen, because we are not given access to this kind of data anymore for different, let's say, security, safety reasons. Sometimes it's not inherent the nature of the phenomenon, but the way, what were the military doing there, what was, I don't know, photographed, for example, and how, and so on. Sometimes we have to be careful about the reasons why the military are keeping confidential information. We should resume the requests to the military with the proper procedure in order to have them release some viable data, because any scientist that might be interested in reports collected by Italian military would not easily get to it. And so, as long as it's only us that are collecting and evaluating these reports, it's upon us to do the work. And we are going to resume. In 2001, we were clearly told and written, please do not ask us anymore for some time, because we have better and more important things now to do. Just to give you an idea, there was an officer in this office, in the Air Force office, in this specific office, and once he was asked by our liaison man, which percentage of your time is devoted to UFOs? And the answer was, since you arrived making your request, it's more than 50%. So it was maybe a costly business to follow ufologists and declassifying and so on. And this is the same difficulty that has been met recently by our American counterpart, John Greenewald, that has been doing hundreds, thousands of requests. And now the official part is been asking info, has found a new way to deny information. Maybe it's losing time from the viewpoint, let's say so.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And kudos to John Greenewald for his work. It's he's always unveiling new parts of the official documentation of the United States. It's always interesting to look at.
Yes.
And even the level of censorship inside the documentation is interesting to look at, and the reason why censorship has been used. To conclude this interview, could you introduce your organization, the CISU?
What can I say about the organization? It's always the same story. That is, there are people interested in the subject. They may be interested for different reasons. Within the large number of different positions, the Italian Center for UFO Studies was born and is going on with the idea that only a scientific approach is a viable way to study ufology. not belief, not cultist approach, not pseudo-scientific one. So we are trying to keep to this kind of approach in collection, in organization of the information, in doing even some study activity, and trying to interested the scientists, the science, the university, but not to great avail up to now. So we are a maintenance work, very involved people that have lost some of the original naivety that all of us have started with, but are still highly motivated in going on. There is everything in our association. You may find university professors, and you may find workers in any kind of social specializations. So it's how can I say? It's ufology. It's for the amateur that are passionate about the subject, like you, like me.
Absolutely. And I'm very glad to have you in Italy to open dialogue with. So as the last gift for our audience, I think there is one picture that is the most well-known Italian case, and I would like to explain to the audience in what it is an important case. So that is the picture. Is that picture authentic?
The one that we were briefly seeing. So it's not the most well-known picture from my country, but it's been well-known abroad now. And well, the story is.
I can assure you that it has become in the last years the most well-known Italian picture of UFO.
Okay, it's not one. It's one of a series of about 90 photos. There were 84, 86, I cannot remember, taken by a military pilot that was. I can have you a better copy of this because it's a partial one only, but we got a very high quality one in our files coming from a first generation positive. Let's see if I can get it again, because it was, it's an old story, it's not a new one. Yeah, that's it. The story is that there was a pilot in an exercise flight in his Fiat G91 in June 1979. And he was coming back from a mission and was asked by the control tower of the small airport, the military airport in Treviso, to have a look at an object that they were seeing on the radar and seeing from the ground. So it was an aero radar visual report, because we have three different sources. He went and he saw a large black cylinder hovering high in the sky. He tried to circle around it, thinking that it was an hot air balloon, but it did not move. It should react from the passage of the plane very near. And he had a look from different angles and took several pictures, but most of these have no longer been available. The man, the pilot, a very experienced military pilot, managed to keep a few copies that were given to him by the photographer that developed in the base. And this is the reason why we got, let's say, a second generation positive. He had the first generation positive photographed, and he allowed us to have a copy-to-copy print made. We finally got 4 different pictures. This one is one of the 4. You can see the airport in the lower left part of the picture. You can see the strange cylinder in a given angulation in the center, and the houses and the fields on the background. But there are different angles, and in some you can only see the sky and the object from a different position and with a different angle. And that's the story. It lasted for a few minutes, then he finished the pictures and went back. And the people from the ground saw the object go away.
What was the witness, the pilot reports on the object? How did it, what was the material of the object?
It was black. He described a little white dome that is not visible in the pictures. The analysts by the Air Force say that it was made of garbage. How can I say in English? It was a plastic balloon inflated with hot air, escaped from the one who launched it. I had to say that at the time there existed a toy balloon that was called UFO Solar that was sold in the newsstands. And the military said it was exactly that kind of object. The pilot did not agree because the dimensions were longer and higher than what a balloon might look like. There has been a lot of discussions about it. Even the investigators, the ufologists, are divided between those who agree that it might have been that kind of toy balloon and those who say no, it was not possible because of the observational data.
What is your opinion on it?
I'm open. I have no firm conclusion about it because some of my best friends and fellows in my organization have opposite opinions, and they are very serious-minded people. So I have to respect their different opinions. It's often the case that we cannot arrive to a definite conclusion, and we are left with the open verdict.
So many years after that case, is there any possibility to reach a conclusion about its nature? Is there any data left uncovered?
No longer. It should have been possible at the time, but that report remained in the local airport. When it arrived to Rome, to the intelligence, it was too late. Only a few pictures had survived. They had trashed the others, and a real investigation by the military was made. The only investigation with the witness was made by ufologists, and it was no longer possible. It should have been necessary to go on the spot, on the place, to try to have similar pictures taken from the position. A lot of things that were no longer possible to do. Reinvestigating pilot sightings is very difficult. It's not like reinvestigating on the place sightings from the ground. And this is something that we have been knowing from a long time. It's interesting because it's a kind of witness and it's a kind of possibility. For example, the pilot can follow the UFO while we cannot, while we walk on the ground. But at the same time, there are difficulties intrinsic in the testimony and in the experience. And it would need specialized investigations that, unfortunately, are not made even by the military, the Italian military, at least. They are not so interested. A frequent answer had been, the Americans are doing that. We are only slightly concerned by it.
Slightly concerned.
Yeah, it's a lot of pilots do not give the written report in order to avoid troubles.
Yeah, absolutely. Edoardo, thank you so much for your time. It was a very interesting interview. I learned a lot, to be honest. And it will be a pleasure to have you on board for another episode regarding Italian cases. I must admit, you are a treasure of information. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for these kind words and for the hospitality.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Are in no way connected.
From outside this world.
What? Back in less than a second, right? And that's just a truth.
Government has made contact with intelligent extraterrestrials.